The candlelight trembled across the polished mahogany, flickering shadows against walls lined with oil paintings that seemed to watch. Silverware clattered, a fork spun across the floor, and then the hall fell into sudden silence. A goblet wobbled, tipped and shattered, wine spilling like dark blood across the checkered tiles. A sharp gasp pierced the quiet. Another groan followed, long and ragged. The air smelled of roasted venison, heavy and warm, mixed with the copper tang of blood, and beneath it all the faint, bitter sweetness of almonds. September 4th, 1849, Natchez. At precisely 8:07 p.m., the laughter turned to screams. Something had been unleashed. The plantation stretched wide under the heavy Mississippi sun, cotton fields like white oceans, endless and merciless. The mansion rose at the center, white columns gleaming, windows reflecting wealth that had been harvested from others' sweat. Behind it, the slave quarters crouched in shadow. Wooden huts low and worn, smoke curling from their chimneys in thin, ghostly threads. Chains clinked softly in the evening breeze, an eerie percussion that echoed across the grounds, a rhythm of unseen suffering. Ezekiel trudged along the dirt path between rows, a scar cutting diagonally across his cheek, eyes fixed on the cotton yet seeing everything else. The overseer's lantern, the way the wind tossed the leaves, the whisper of rebellion in the air. His hands were calloused, cracked, but his mind remembered more than he let on. He muttered under his breath as he worked, "Can't hold it forever. Something's bound to snap." Miss Lila crouched behind the edge of the kitchen doorway, her bonnet shadowing eyes sharp with curiosity. She had a habit of listening at doors, of hearing secrets whispered in hushed tones before anyone else. She had caught Ezekiel's words. She had caught worse. "They say the boy from the fields will," she whispered to herself, shaking her head, afraid even the walls might repeat her words. The mansion's doors opened onto polished floors, and the laughter of the family inside spilled like music. Inside, servants moved like shadows, carrying trays, polishing silver, obeying without thought. Outside, Ezekiel paused, looking toward the dark line of trees at the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of blood and earth, and with it a promise that not all would stay silent. Chains rattled again. Somewhere a door creaked. A child whimpered, muffled by a blanket. Ezekiel's scarred cheek tightened with tension. "They think this is order," he muttered. "But order breaks where the weak cannot bend." Miss Lila pressed her ear closer to the wall, hearing footsteps approaching. She shifted her weight, heart pounding. Her hands smelled faintly of iron and smoke from the hearth, a reminder of where she belonged, yet not truly part of either world, the enslaved or the free. She scribbled a note in the margin of a maid's ledger, one that no one would ever see, a warning or a whisper of truth. The wind stirred again. In the fields, the cotton bent and swayed as if whispering secrets to those who could hear. Ezekiel returned to his labor, moving methodically, knowing eyes followed, knowing chains clinked in rhythm with the mansion above. The night would come, and with it the tension simmered like water under ice, waiting for a crack to break the surface. Even as the sun dipped low, casting blood-orange shadows across the white columns, both the mansion and the quarters exhaled their secrets into the heavy Mississippi air. And somewhere between opulence and misery, the first notes of something terrible began to hum. Quiet, insistent, inevitable. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and smoke, the hearth's warmth cutting the chill from the stone floor. Clara knelt by the edge of a barrel, hands busy sorting herbs, her silver locket hidden beneath her shirt, pressed to her chest. She traced its delicate engraving with a fingertip, remembering the lullaby her mother had hummed, the soft, curling melody that once made the world seem gentle, even as chains rattled outside. "Clara, fetch me the thyme," came the sharp voice of Aunt Millie, the older healer in the kitchen. Her hands smelled of iron and smoke, fingers knotted and strong, yet precise. "Yes, Aunt Millie," Clara whispered, rising. She moved with quiet precision, her eyes scanning every shadow, noting every sound, the creak of floorboards above, the whisper of wind through the shutters. In the Manor's drawing room, Jonathan Calhoun checked his gold pocket watch, the ticking loud enough to punctuate his impatience. He straightened his coat in the mirror, smoothing the lapels as if brushing away the weight of the land he ruled. "Father," a voice trembled in the hall. "Please." Jonathan's whip cracked, slicing through the air like a serpent striking. Clara's father fell to his knees, the cotton fields of years pressed into his back. "Do you think a single man can hold this land without obedience?" Jonathan barked. Clara froze at the doorway, hidden by shadows, silver locket pressed against her heart. Her mother's lullaby had long since faded into a memory, replaced by the echo of the whip. She did not move, did not cry. She only watched, memorizing every detail. The gold watch, the way Jonathan's jaw clenched, the porcelain skin of Sarah Calhoun as she peered from the upper staircase, her delicate hands trembling around a hand mirror. "You shouldn't watch," Sarah whispered from the shadows, eyes wide, voice almost a hiss. "It is not safe." Clara's gaze did not falter. "I must see," she said softly, almost to herself, "so I know what to avoid, so I know who holds the power." "You're young," Sarah said, her voice fragile, almost musical, cracking with fear. "Do you not dream of freedom?" "I dream," Clara said, "but dreams alone do nothing." Her fingers brushed against the silver locket again. She remembered her mother's eyes, her gentle hands guiding Clara through the herbs, the plants, the secrets that would later taste like survival. Sage, wormwood, bitter almonds, names whispered, leaves crushed between fingers. Every herb a story, every smell a memory of power quietly passed from one generation to the next. Jonathan stormed past, the gold watch swinging from his waist, ticking as if to mark every heartbeat he claimed. "Sarah, you will sit still." His voice dripped with authority. The porcelain mirror clutched in Sarah's hand trembled, reflecting not her face but her terror. "Ah, yes, Jonathan," Sarah whispered, forcing a smile she did not feel. Clara crouched near the hearth again, grinding leaves into powder, listening to the echo of chains outside. The sound was constant, a low rhythm that reminded her of her father, of the fields, of the man who would not bend even when his body was broken. "Clara," Aunt Millie's voice came again, calm but firm. "Watch him, learn. Not just the herbs, but the timing, the patience. Every gesture counts. Power lies where the eyes are open, not the mouth." "Yes, Aunt Millie," Clara said, eyes narrowing. She moved carefully, grinding, measuring, memorizing. The silver locket warmed against her chest, as if it too understood the gravity of the lessons she was learning. Late at night, Clara listened from the shadows as Jonathan's laughter echoed through the halls, booming and cruel, a sound that chased sleep away. Sarah's soft sobs sometimes reached her ears, hidden behind the locked doors. Clara whispered her mother's lullaby to herself, soft as wind over cotton, a secret thread tying her to courage, to memory, to the herbs she would later use in ways none could foresee. Every day she observed, every day she remembered. The gold watch ticking, the whip slicing, the mirror trembling, the chains rattling. The herbs crushed into power, and in her quiet, patient way, she began to understand the language of survival, of obedience, of rebellion, and of the small, quiet hands that could one day turn the tide. "I see everything," Clara murmured to the shadows, "and I forget nothing." Outside, the wind whispered through the cotton, carrying the faint scent of smoke, rosemary, and something bitter, almost sweet, an omen that even the strongest men might one day fall to a hand that had watched, learned, and remembered. Night had fallen over the plantation, a velvet dark draped across the cotton fields. Fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns, their light pulsing in rhythm with Clara's quickened heartbeat. She moved silently along the stable's edge, her hands brushing against the wooden beams, inhaling the faint scent of hay and horses. "Clara," a voice whispered, low and nervous. "You shouldn't be out here." Samuel stepped from the shadows, holding a carved wooden horse in his calloused hands. "I made this for you," he said, offering it like a secret gift. "So when you're in the kitchen or in the fields, you'll have something of me with you." Clara's fingers closed over the horse, feeling the smooth grooves. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "It's hope." Samuel leaned closer, careful to keep their bodies hidden from the manor's windows. "One day," he whispered, eyes shining in the firefly glow, "we'll leave. Not tomorrow, not next week, someday. But we'll go, together. I believe you," Clara said softly, pressing the locket beneath her shirt, a connection to her mother and the courage she had taught her. "But we must be careful. The smallest mistake and—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy between them. Elsewhere, Reverend Pike stood in the front hall of the mansion, Bible open and worn, the pages blotched with wine stains. His voice carried into the night, smooth practice dripping with sanctimony. "Rebellion is a sin," he intoned, eyes sweeping over the gathered slaves in the yard. "Mercy and obedience shall keep you safe." Remember, the Lord watches all. Clara crouched in the shadows, ground herbs between her fingers, tasting the sharpness of rosemary on her tongue. She heard only hypocrisy. The preacher blessed the hands that whipped and condemned the hearts that dreamed. "I don't need the Lord to tell me what is right," she murmured to Samuel as he pressed closer. "I need only to see." Samuel nodded, eyes scanning the yard for overseers, for Jonathan's watchful gaze. "Then we see together, and we remember. Every face, every shadow, every crack in their armor. And one day," his words faded into the hum of the night, carried off by the fireflies' tiny, urgent lights. They huddled together near the stalls, sharing whispered laughter and fleeting touches, the kind of secret intimacy the world outside their haven could never comprehend. Horses shifted, hooves clattering softly, snorting in the quiet. Every sound, every flicker of firelight became a marker of life lived dangerously but fully. "Promise me," Clara said, voice barely audible, "that if we leave together. No one gets left behind." Samuel pressed the carved horse to her palm. "I promise, with everything I have." Meanwhile, Reverend Pike continued his sermon inside the mansion, blessing the wine, the silver, the opulent chairs. He spoke of morality and justice, but every word was laced with the comfort of oppression. "Do not seek vengeance," he said, voice rich and melodic. "Trust in God's judgment." Clara's fingers clenched the locket. "Vengeance isn't a sin when it is survival," she whispered. She felt the fireflies' warmth, their fragile light dancing over the dirt, over the hay, over the night, and allowed herself a tiny, secret smile. Hope could survive even here in the shadows. The two lingered in the stable, listening to the distant laughter of Jonathan and Sarah, the clink of glasses, the soft creak of the mansion settling. Samuel brushed his hand across Clara's hair, steadying her trembling shoulders. "We wait," he said. "We watch. And one day—" "Yes," Clara breathed, eyes bright in the dim glow. "One day we run." And as the wind whispered through the cotton, carrying the faint smell of smoke and crushed herbs, the fireflies danced on, tiny sparks of rebellion, a fleeting promise that freedom could bloom even under the heaviest chains. The kitchen door creaked as Samuel lingered near the edge, brushing flour from his hands after slipping a loaf of bread into his pocket. Clara's eyes caught the movement from the shadows. "Be careful," she whispered, heart pounding. "Don't let him see you." A sudden, sharp voice cut through the quiet. "What do we have here?" Jonathan Calhoun emerged from the hallway, gold pocket watch glinting in the lantern light, eyes like coals. "Samuel," he sneered, stepping closer, whip coiled at his side. "And what are you doing skulking about the kitchen like a thief?" Samuel straightened, jaw tight. You were what?" Jonathan's words dripped with venom. "Stealing from your betters." He raised the whip, letting it glint in the candlelight. "Mercy is for men, and you are not a man." The whip cracked through the air, sharp and terrifying. Samuel fell to his knees, groaning, hands pressed to his back where the leather cut deep. His cries echoed across the yard. Ezekiel muttered a prayer from the shadows, shoulders hunched. Miss Lila pressed herself against the pantry wall, hands trembling, her eyes wide. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she did not move, did not speak. She had learned long ago that watching and remaining unseen was safer than intervening. Sarah Calhoun's hands clutched her porcelain mirror, knuckles white. She turned her face toward the wall, pretending not to see, her breath shallow and fast. She dared not speak. "Look at me when I am speaking to you," Jonathan barked. Samuel flinched, gaze flicking toward Clara, who crouched silently near the edge of the hearth. Every muscle in her body screamed to act, but she stayed rooted in place. The silver locket beneath her shirt felt like fire against her chest. "You will learn obedience or you will break completely," Jonathan hissed. Another lash. Samuel's body jerked with the impact. He gasped, the copper tang of blood mingling with the faint sweetness of almonds from the kitchen herbs that Clara had been handling. The scent triggered a memory, a reminder that control could be wrested, that pain could be answered. Clara pressed her palm over her mouth, silent tears pooling in her eyes. Her mind raced. Every face, every shadow, every subtle movement memorized. Every act of cruelty catalogued. This would not be forgotten. As Jonathan stormed back into the hallway, whip coiled once more. Samuel lay broken, trembling on the floor. Clara knelt beside him, voice barely above a whisper. "I will not let you die for nothing," she murmured, pressing the silver locket against his chest. "Not for this. Not ever." Ezekiel's prayer drifted across the yard, muttered under his breath. "God protect us from the cruelty we endure." Miss Lila's tears fell silently, pooling on the worn floorboards. Sarah shivered behind her mirror, trapped between fear and complicity. The kitchen, once a haven of sense and secret learning, now reeked of fear and iron. Clara's resolve hardened. She would watch. She would wait. She would learn. And when the time came, the punishment inflicted would not remain unreturned. Outside, the wind rustled the cotton fields, a whispering chorus carrying the echoes of pain, the promise of retribution. The night held its breath, and so did Clara. Every heartbeat a vow. One day she would make them see what cruelty truly demanded. Night had settled like a heavy cloak over the Natchez plantation. Clara moved silently through the shadows of the herb garden, the silver locket pressing against her chest. The air smelled of damp earth and crushed rosemary. In her hands, she carried a small knife and a basket for bitter herbs, leaves that smelled sharp and alive. "Aunt Millie," she whispered, kneeling by the soil where roots and leaves intertwined. "I don't know if I can do this." The older woman's hands, gnarled yet steady, hovered over a pouch of dried roots. "You already can," Aunt Millie said, voice soft but firm. "The world will try to make you small, Clara. But remember, the smallest hand can crush what the largest man thinks untouchable. Grind carefully, measure with your heart, and never forget the song." She tapped the locket around Clara's neck. "Your mother's lullaby is more than memory. It is power." Clara nodded, brushing dirt from her fingers, crushing bitter leaves between her palms. "I will not fail him." "Or me," she said, eyes narrowing as she scanned the shadowed tree line. Footsteps scraped the path nearby. Clara froze, the basket shaking. Charles, the overseer, appeared, lanterns swinging, his breath smelling faintly of whiskey. The whip at his belt coiled like a serpent ready to strike. "What are you doing here?" he slurred, voice thick with suspicion. Clara bent lower, hiding the herbs in the folds of her apron. "Just checking the stew for the night, overseer," she said, voice steady. Her hands were calm, pressing a small bowl of flour against the table. "You know how the kitchen smells change if the bread isn't right." Charles grunted, amber eyes flicking between her and the basket. Make sure nothing burns, and stay out of trouble." He lurched away, the whip rattling, leaving Clara's heart hammering. Later, in the safety of the kitchen, Ruth approached cautiously, yellow ribbon tucked beneath her bonnet, eyes darting nervously. "Miss Clara, are you sure about this?" she whispered. "I have no choice," Clara said, crushing peach pits into a fine bitter powder. She hummed her mother's lullaby, a soft melody that curled around the simmering stew. Each note was a thread of memory, a promise, a warning. If we do not act, he will continue to destroy everything we love, everything we are. Ruth shivered, glancing toward the hallway. "And if someone finds out?" "They will not," Clara said, hands steady, eyes unblinking. "We work carefully. Every step is calculated. The right moment, the right place. Nothing more, nothing less." The night passed in shadows and whispers. Clara moved methodically, crushing herbs, mixing powders, tasting for bitterness that would not betray her intent. Aunt Millie instructed her on subtle cues, how much to grind, how to balance flavor with lethality. "Her pinch too much, a stir too little, and the world notices," the older woman said, voice like gravel and wind. Outside, the wind stirred the cotton fields, carrying the faint sound of chains rattling. Clara paused, inhaling the damp air. The rhythm was a reminder, constant, patient, relentless, the same rhythm that had marked her father's suffering, Samuel's fear and her own quiet endurance. She returned to the kitchen, Ruth trailing, hands clasped tight beneath her apron. "It is almost time," Clara said, voice low, almost a whisper of smoke. "We finish the preparations, we watch, we wait. And when the moment comes..." "Yes," Ruth breathed, eyes wide, voice trembling. Clara's hands moved in a ritual she had practiced hundreds of times. She crushed the peach pits, whispering the lullaby, sprinkling bitter leaves into the bowls for the evening meal. Each motion precise, deliberate, a dance between memory and intent. She felt the locket against her chest, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the kitchen, the wind, the fireflies outside. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Clara paused, listening. Somewhere, Charles muttered in his drunken stupor. Somewhere a horse snorted in the stable. All was as it should be. She straightened, fingers covered in the dust of herbs and crushed pits. Soon, she said to herself, soon it ends. Soon justice tastes like freedom. And outside, the fireflies blinked once, twice, like tiny sparks of rebellion in the dark. The night held its breath, the plantation silent but for the soft, patient ticking of Jonathan's gold watch from the hall beyond. The dining hall gleamed under a dozen flickering candles, the polished silver catching the light like frozen flames. The long table groaned beneath platters of roasted duck, bowls of stew, crystal goblets filled with red wine. Guests murmured in soft conversation, laughter threading through the gilded room, unaware of the night's dark promise. Clara moved in the kitchen doorway, basket in hand, eyes steady, lips pressed tight. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she ladled the thick stew into each bowl. The bitter almond scent almost imperceptible but present, a ghostly warning beneath the aroma of roasted meat. Ruth hovered behind her, yellow ribbon tucked beneath her bonnet. Hands clasped tightly, eyes darting toward the hall. "It's almost ready," Clara whispered. "Every bowl, every plate, watch the rhythm. Timing is everything." The wine poured with a soft gurgle into goblets, red liquid catching the candlelight. Jonathan Calhoun checked his gold pocket watch, ticking louder than the voices around him. He leaned back, smirking at the reflection of himself in the polished silver. "Everything here bends to my will," he said, voice rich, full of certainty. His laughter echoed across the room, and the sound bounced off the walls, rich and cruel. Sarah Calhoun clutched her porcelain hand mirror, knuckles white, forcing herself to smile. "Jonathan, you flatter us with your stories," she said, voice brittle, eyes darting at the stew as Ruth placed the bowls in front of the guests. Reverend Pike murmured a blessing, Bible with wine stains open in his hands. "May the Lord watch over this house and guide all who dwell within it," he intoned. His eyes flicked toward Clara in the shadows, though he did not speak her name. Clara's hand hovered over the last bowl, breathing measured, lips pressing tighter over the memory of lullabies and whispered lessons. She set the bowl down and withdrew to the shadows near the kitchen door, silent, deliberate. The first signs were subtle. Reverend Pike coughed, hand rising to his throat. He froze, his blessing cut short. Jonathan's smirk faltered just slightly as a sharp twinge gripped his chest. Guests looked to each other, confusion knitting their brows. Samuel's carved wooden horse would have been her thought now. The memory of stolen moments in the stable, the whisper of fireflies, tiny sparks of courage she carried in her chest. Then chaos erupted. Jonathan stumbled, wine spilling across the table, goblets clattering, silverware skittering. He gasped, eyes wild. What is this?" The stew bowl tipped slightly, sauce dripping like dark blood onto the polished floor. Sarah screamed, dropping her mirror. It shattered with a crystalline snap, porcelain shards scattering. Guests convulsed, some falling over tables, others clutching their throats, faces twisting in horror. The faint smell of almonds, bitter and unmistakable, mingled with the rich aroma of roasted duck, making the room heavy and choking. Charles the overseer leapt forward, whip coiled at his side, eyes scanning the room. "What in God's—" His words caught in his throat as he too felt the sudden vertigo, the taste of metallic bitterness in his mouth. Ruth gasped, eyes widening, catching Clara in the doorway. The silent acknowledgement between them, Ruth's fear, Clara's calm resolve, hung heavier than the screams. No words passed. None were needed. The room was alive with chaos, but Clara did not run. She watched, cold and deliberate, heart steady despite the pounding of her pulse in her ears. Jonathan's body trembled violently, hands clutching the table. "Everything here bends to my will," he croaked, voice breaking, eyes widening in disbelief as his body collapsed across the polished floor, silverware clattering around him. Sarah whimpered, shaking, face pale, pressed against the wall. She reached for the broken pieces of her mirror, holding them close as if they could shield her from the horror unraveling in front of her. Reverend Pike fell to his knees, Bible slipping from his hands, the wine stains smeared across the floor, his blessing unfinished. Charles staggered, trying to regain control, but the room spun beneath him. Clara stepped into the hall, every eye now subtly aware of her, though no one could name her. Her silver locket pressed against her chest, a reminder of the mother she had lost, the lullaby she carried like a secret weapon. Her hands, once trembling, were now steady, precise. She watched the chaos unfold, noting the positions, the reactions, the fear. Every detail burned into memory. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. The fireflies blinked faintly through the windows, tiny sparks in the dark night, mocking the grandeur of the shattered hall. The plantation, once a house of order and cruelty, now reeked of bitter almonds, blood and fear. Clara did not flinch. She did not flee. She simply breathed, steady and resolute, watching the world she had endured for so long bend under the weight of its own arrogance. The silver locket warmed against her chest, a pulse of victory, grief, and the promise that the night had changed everything. And somewhere from deep in the shadows of the kitchen, Aunt Millie's whispered lesson returned. Power lies where the eyes are open, not the mouth. Clara's eyes, wide and unflinching, confirmed she had finally learned. The sun had barely risen when whispers began to coil through the plantation like smoke. Sarah Calhoun sat on a splintered chair in what remained of the dining hall, porcelain shards at her feet. Tears streaked her cheeks as she muttered, voice trembling. It was Clara. It was her. She brought this upon us. Reverend Pike paced the floor, Bible in hand, wine stains visible even in the pale morning light. Satan's hand walks among us, he spat, voice sharp with fear and moral outrage. She has cursed the house. No blessing can reach here now. The Lord will not forgive such wickedness. Ezekiel muttered prayers from the corner, head bowed. God grant them mercy. Grant them justice, he whispered, though no one else heard. The chains rattled faintly in the wind outside, a hollow echo of nights past. Overseer Charles fumed, whip coiled at his side, eyes scanning the horizon. She'll pay, he growled. No one gets away from me, not her. Not anyone who helped. He barked orders to the remaining slaves, brow furrowed, hands shaking with rage. Those who were suspected of aiding Clara were beaten silently in the fields, their cries muffled by the rustle of cotton leaves and the distant hum of insects. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the plantation, among the enslaved, her name passed in hushed reverence. Clara, whispered one, eyes wide. The Avenger. Another nodded, clutching a small talisman. She answered the masters. She did what none dared. The lullabies that had guided Clara now traveled from mouth to mouth, a soft, secret anthem of hope and quiet rebellion. The trial was swift. Clara stood in the courthouse, rope coiled at the ready, wooden floor creaking beneath her feet. The judge's gavel slammed down, a hollow sound reverberating off the high ceilings. How do you plead? He barked, though Clara's hands were steady, her silver locket pressed beneath her blouse. I answered cruelty with truth, she said, voice calm, clear, unyielding. The courtroom went silent, as if her words had carved themselves into the walls. Witnesses murmured, some fearful, some awed. The prosecution accused her of poisoning, of rebellion, of murder. Clara did not respond further. She did not flinch. She did not cry. Outside, Samuel waited near the steps, shoulders slumped, face pale. He had been spared the worst, but his hands shook, one clutching a carved wooden horse. His eyes never left Clara as she was led from the courthouse, rope in hand, chains rattling softly as she ascended the steps. The crowd outside was a mix of fear and fascination. Some gasped, some whispered prayers, some stared in awe. Among the enslaved, heads bowed, eyes shining faintly in the dawn, she had become legend before her end, a name spoken in reverence and fear alike. At dawn, the rope tightened. Clara's hands brushed the coarse hemp, fingers cold but unshaking. She looked toward the distant cotton fields, toward Samuel, and allowed herself a small, silent smile. The lullaby hummed from the quarters behind her, carried softly through the wind and the morning air. Her mother's song, the same melody that had guided her, now whispered of justice, memory, and courage. Charles shouted, fury twisting his features. Hang her! Hang the witch! But the rope creaked and tightened, finality in its sound. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her heartbeat and the faint hum of a lullaby. Blending fear, grief, and defiance, Sarah wept openly, clutching her broken mirror, unable to comprehend that a girl she had deemed insignificant had toppled the power she had lived under her whole life. God forgive me, she whispered. I should have seen, but her words died in the morning wind. Reverend Pike muttered prayers, Bible clenched to his chest, eyes watering with impotent rage. "The Lord has judged, yet I feel only fury," he said. "The wicked cannot triumph, yet here she stands even in death, a shadow over us all." Samuel stepped forward as the body swung, hand pressed against his mouth, tears tracing lines through dirt and grime. He had loved her, feared for her, but never fully understood the depth of her courage. His carved wooden horse fell from trembling fingers to the dust at his feet. The weight of silence pressed down, heavier than any whip, colder than any chain. The plantation exhaled, heavy with the aftermath of rebellion, fear, and awe. Clara's name traveled from lips to lips in the quarters, whispered, revered, feared. The gold pocket watch lay abandoned in the hall, ticking uselessly now. The shattered mirror reflected nothing but morning light, empty and fractured, and somewhere in the quiet, the lullaby hummed again, faint, persistent, a soft echo of memory, of resistance, of a story that would not die with her. The chains clinked faintly in the wind, not as punishment but as testament. Clara had lived, planned, struck, and even in death she had become legend. Years passed, and the Natchez plantation became a house of shadows. The walls held whispers, the floorboards remembered tremors, and the cotton fields rustled like soft, warning voices. Stories of Clara spread far beyond the quarters, drifting through the Mississippi wind, twisting and growing with each retelling. "They say she poisoned every plate in the house," one old woman whispered to a child as they passed the ruins. Her voice trembled, eyes wide. "Not just the master, but the reverend, the overseer, every one of them. None survived her wrath." The child shivered, clinging to a tiny talisman. "Do you think she lives?" the boy asked, voice barely above the hush of the wind. "Some say yes," the woman said, lowering her voice. "They say she escaped to New Orleans, free, living among strangers. Some say you can still hear her lullaby if you tiptoe past the quarters at night." Even in truth, the details were fluid, molded by fear, reverence, and imagination. Jonathan Calhoun's gold pocket watch became a symbol of hubris, often retold as having stopped at the exact moment of his downfall. The broken porcelain mirror of Sarah Calhoun became an omen of vanity shattered. And the lullaby, a simple melody passed from mother to daughter, whispered in kitchens, sung softly in fields, was no longer just a song. It was the thread of legend itself. Travelers and abolitionists carried the tale as they moved south. In crowded meeting halls, women leaned forward to hear the story of the kitchen slave who dared strike the powerful. "Clara," they would say, voice low, "the girl who answered cruelty with truth." And in those same towns, slaveholders whispered warnings to their children and overseers. "Do not cross shadows in the dark. Remember what happened at Natchez." Even in the quarters, children grew up with her name etched into their imagination. "Don't cross Clara's shadow," mothers would murmur, "or she'll serve you supper." They did not always understand what had occurred, only that the story carried weight, power, and caution. Every firefly that blinked across a field in the dusk seemed to echo that warning. A tiny spark of remembrance, of defiance carried forward through generations. Travelers spoke of glimpsing a figure moving silently among the alleys of New Orleans. Small, quiet, eyes sharp and observant, a silver locket glinting beneath the folds of her cloak. Some claimed she had built a new life entirely, always carrying the lessons, the memories, the lullaby, and the bitter knowledge she had learned in Natchez. Others said she had vanished into myth entirely, leaving only shadows and whispers in her wake. The plantation itself decayed, but the stories of Clara persisted. Each retelling carried fragments of truth, embroidered with legend. Overseers and masters spoke of the consequences of cruelty, as if a ghost haunted the fields, while the enslaved repeated her tale with awe, teaching the next generation about courage, patience, and the power of knowledge hidden in plain sight. "Did she strike again?" one young boy asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide. "No," an elder replied. "She only struck once, but that was enough. One strike changed everything. One hand, steady and small against the weight of the world. That was Clara." And so the broken mirror, the gold pocket watch, the lullaby, they were no longer mere objects. They were symbols. Proof that a single act of courage, a quiet hand, and a mind sharpened by pain and knowledge could ripple through time. The story of Clara became more than memory. It became legend, a quiet warning, a spark for those who would hear it and remember that even the smallest could resist, endure and shape history with deliberate hands. Even decades later, when the moss hung heavy from the oaks, and the cotton fields had long since been abandoned. Travelers and townsfolk alike paused, listening. A lullaby drifted faintly through the wind, a soft echo as if Clara herself still watched, still whispered, still reminded the world of the power of one small, unyielding hand. Clara's hands stirred the pot, but history stirred the fire. In chains she found a weapon. In silence she found a voice. The kitchen, once a place of labor and obedience, became her classroom, her sanctuary, her armory. Every herb crushed, every seed ground, every lullaby hummed into the night was a declaration. The powerless could resist. Justice and vengeance danced in her mind like shadows in candlelight. To some she was a criminal, condemned and hanged at dawn. To others she was a hero, an agent of truth wielding the only power left to her. Knowledge, patience and courage. Where cruelty reigned, rebellion, quiet, deliberate, precise, became the language of survival. Memory carried her farther than freedom ever could. The gold watch that ticked through Jonathan's arrogance, the mirror that shattered in Sarah's hands, the lullaby floating across the quarters, they were not merely objects. They were witnesses. History remembered Clara, even as the world tried to forget her. The plantation stones, the cotton fields, the wind through the oaks, they all bore the imprint of her defiance. And yet, the question lingered, long and low. Where does justice end and vengeance begin? Who survives the reckoning, and who is buried beneath the weight of their own cruelty? Clara offered no answer, only action. The poison was her argument, precise and undeniable, leaving the powerful shaken and the oppressed awakened. In every whispered retelling, in every cautious glance at the kitchen, in every soft hum of a lullaby under the moon, her story remained. A reminder that even in chains, even in silence, resistance finds a way. The powerless can wield power, the quiet can roar, and the smallest hand can alter the course of history. Clara of Natchez was both murderer and martyr. To some she is evil, to others a hero, to history a wound that still bleeds. Her story is not tidy. It does not sit comfortably in memory or legend. It twists, sharp and jagged, through the hearts of those who hear it. If you were in her place, bound, beaten, silenced, would you forgive? Or would you burn it all down? Would you sit quietly, hoping mercy finds you, or would you take the only power left no matter the cost? Her choices were born of pain, of injustice, of the unbearable weight of cruelty. And history asks you the same. What would you do when the world denies your humanity? We want to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your perspective on Clara. Was she justified, reckless, brave, or tragic? Share this story to keep the whispers alive, and subscribe for more deep dives into dark, hidden histories that shape the world in ways textbooks never tell. Her lullaby still hums in the wind. Her shadow still flickers in the corners of the plantations and towns she touched. Listen carefully and ask yourself, when the powerless rise, what will you do?